talk Cincinnati Reds, though, as this is a team that appears to be right almost in the same category that the Pirates are. Naturally, they have identical records at 37 and 41. We'll bring in Tommy Thrall, play-by-play radio voice for the Cincinnati Reds, who joins us from Great American Ballpark Live. Tommy, thanks for coming back to the program. I'm curious how the Reds view themselves. Here in Pittsburgh, I'm not sure we have a great indication, but to the Cincinnati Reds, it seems like a team on the rise, much like here in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, this was a year where everybody really expected this team to be competitive. I think, by and large, they're not where they want to be. Injuries have played a big factor in that. And so I think they still feel like this is a team that can win. I mean, you look at the rotation. The rotation's pretty good. And it's pitched pretty well for the most part this year. The bullpen's been better. So I still think that the offense is kind of where kind of the Pirates are at. The Reds are trying to figure out how to score some runs consistently, just like the Pirates are. You'd like to see a lot more days, of course, everybody would, like last night, than what we've seen over the last 12 days before that. So I think it's there. They've got to get some guys back. They got to get some guys healthy. Matt McClain, the hope is still that he'll be back in August, maybe late August. It doesn't look like Christian Encarnacion Strand's going to be back anytime soon. It was just announced today that he's going to have surgery. Noelvi Marte, who's been out with the PED suspension, is supposed to be back in a few days. But the numbers for him in AAA during his rehab assignment haven't been great. How much can you really take from that? I mean, there's been plenty of guys throughout the history of this game that have not done well on rehab assignments, but then they get back to the big league level and then they have success. So, those are guys that are expected to be big contributors to this team, and that this team has been without this year. And I think that's a lot for any team to overcome, especially teams in the situation like the Reds and Pirates are in.
Tommy Thrall, play-by-play man for the Reds, is with us. Let's talk about the offensive woes. Is it just due in large part to the lack of personnel and the injuries, or have guys not lived up to their potential, their billing, that had maybe decent years last year, have tapered off this year? And I ask that only because that's been the case. Tommy, as you know, here in Pittsburgh, Jack Zawinski has struggled mightily. Key Brian Hayes not giving the Pirates nearly what they need to get from him. Henry Davis has been largely a disappointment here, the first overall pick from a few years ago. Andy Haynes, the hitting instructor, under great fire. The manager was asked about that on our radio station today, why the loyalty almost. So I'm curious as to what the climate is there, the frustration level is there in Cincinnati. Is it anything like it is here in Pittsburgh?
I would say it's probably very similar, to be honest. And I think that's the way this game goes, whether it's the hitting coach's fault or not.
Right.
That's who it's going to fall back on. I mean, that's just the way this game works. That's the way sports work, especially at the highest level. Joel McKeithen is the hitting coach here in Cincinnati. Of course, he gets a lot of credit when the offense is clicking last year like it was. This year, there are questions. Does there need to be a change? But is it his fault? Probably not. There are guys that are underperforming that had success last year. I think the most notable of those guys is Will Benson. He was a pretty steady hitter in the middle of this lineup last year, corner outfielder, and it just hasn't worked for him yet offensively this year. He got off to a really slow start last year, too, and then was able to get it turned around. He went back down to Louisville for a while, kind of figured some things out. I think the hope is that he'll be able to figure it out, but at the big league level this year. But it's been a long drought for him now. So he's one guy that hasn't performed as well. Ellie De La Cruz, I think you can pretty well expect what the Reds have gotten from him this year, because he's a second-year player. He's extremely electric. He's loaded with ability. And he's kind of I don't want to say he's all or nothing, because he's not. It's not as simple as that with him. But there's a lot of room for error with a guy that has as big of a swing as he does. He's cut it down some, and I still think he's so young, and not just young in experience, which he is, but he's young age-wise. So I don't think it's fair to expect him to be a Hall of Fame caliber player right now in his second year. So I think what he's doing this year is still well above average. I mean, he just hit his 14th home run last night. He's hitting right around 250. He will finish better than what he's done this year, and what he's done already is still pretty good. But it's still not the same production that the Reds saw from him when he was called up right away last year. And the other guy I think I hate to say he's a disappointment, but he got off to a really slow start, and he's been on fire in June, as Jamer Candelario. That's another guy that kind of fits into that conversation. TJ Friedel's been banged up, so he hasn't really gotten going yet either, and he's landed back on the IL. So, yeah, there's a little of that. But I also think, going back to the injuries, without trying to be too long-winded here, once you get some of those guys back, I think everybody else just kind of falls into place, and it takes pressure off other guys, and then it's a lot easier to hit. So you've got guys in the lineup on a daily basis right now that might not be in there on a consistent basis if everybody's healthy. And I think Stuart Fairchild's one of those guys. You probably wouldn't see him against right-handed pitching if everybody else is healthy. Jake Fraley hasn't hit for the same power that the Reds saw from him last year. He's only got 9 RBIs. He's hitting about 280, but just not seeing the same power production from him.
Tommy Thrall is with us. He's a Reds broadcaster. He's not a Pirates broadcaster, even though the things that we're talking about sound so similar. So I just want to make that differentiate there. So let's talk about what the Reds are going to be. Buyers, aggressive at the deadline. I'm assuming, Tommy, on the wish list, much like it is here in Pittsburgh. A bat or two is on the wish list, and how much pressure is there? And how aggressive do you anticipate the Reds being in their pursuit of more offensive production?
I'm curious to see. I don't know. I think that all depends on what goes on over the next month.
Let me ask you this. What's the rhetoric? What's the rhetoric around the team, the narrative, maybe even from the fan base on sports talk radio there? Not sure if your owner or baseball operations president have come out and said anything one way or the other.
No, they haven't said anything yet. And I think that the anticipation is that this team will be a buyer. But don't you think a lot of teams are kind of in that same boat? Because,
yes,
this is a Reds team that's only 2.5 games out of the wild card. They're not in a unique situation. Pirates are in the same spot. Like you said, identical records. That means that a lot of teams are going to be buyers. And with what the Diamondbacks did last year, you just get into the playoffs and you don't know what could happen. So
I'm laughing. I'm laughing because you're in a completely different market and we're talking about the exact same thing. It's absolutely hilarious.
But it's the
it
same
is what
thing
it
that's
is
going on in a lot of markets.
Yeah.
It is, and I think that's the good and the bad with the expansion of playoffs. It's a really unique situation because it's all still relatively new with the way the playoff system is. But there's a lot of teams that are going to be in a situation to where a bat could make a big difference. I think both the Reds and the Pirates are in the same situation, and both teams could use an outfield bat. So you have the Reds and the Pirates, two teams, same division, probably targeting the same players. Are either of those teams going to be willing to give up very valuable prospects just to try to sneak into the playoffs? I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I know what the fans want. You know what the people that follow the team on a daily basis want. But does that actually make sense if you're the one running the organization? And the other part about it, too, is you have to keep in mind, by and large, it's going to be a rental player. In the situation of the Reds, when you look ahead to next year, you're hoping that everybody's going to be back healthy. So with that, there aren't a whole lot of holes to fill on this Reds team right now. So are you willing to try to go all in on a season where you might not even have some of your best players fully healthy even for the playoffs if you get them back at all? For a rental, I don't know. There's just so many question marks. So I'm just glad I don't have to run the team. That's kind of what it comes down to. But I do think the Reds are well positioned to have success down the road, not just this year. I know the Pirates, you look at that team, you look at the rotation, Skeens, Keller at the top. I mean, nobody wants to play a team like that in the postseason. I don't think anybody would want to play a team with the arms that the Reds are running out in a postseason situation either. So these are teams where, especially if you feel good about the bullpens, you get one bat that can make a difference. Who knows what could happen in the playoffs?